And of course, good evening. It's June 11th, 2024. We're in our next collection of discussions in our Outside the Class series. It's a series from the Bible Project. It's about the entire TaNaK, right? The Old Testament. On TheDustyFeet.com, in the Outside the Class section, we have that TaNaK Old Testament source video section set up for your review. Because the intent of Outside the Class is for you to listen to the in-class lecture first. They would all be found, of course, in that source video playlist. We try to keep these to about 15 minutes or so, make them easy to catch and easier to catch up on. So we're on a quest, scroll by scroll, book by book, a journey through this collection, but with a fun and different twist on Outside the Class, on the Dusty Feet. And of course, before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, that's when you click the subscribe button, because those reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, that's when you click that like button, because that is the way that YouTube chooses to share these to more people, if they wish. You know, in this series, we're going to be covering the entire TaNaK, right? The entire Old Testament. Yet, we're going to be doing it in the original order of this collection, the Hebrew Scriptures order. So, it could get interesting once we get past the first 5. But for now, TaNaK, Old Testament. We're in Genesis, Bereshit, chapters 1 through 11. This is our part 2. So remember from last week that we said we're in God's image by default, a beautiful and wonderful creation, capable of oh so much. Given the tools and resources for oh so much, our design and purpose is amazing. And I love again how Tim put it, that we get the freedom and dignity of the choice. God is honoring us by giving us his choice. So I guess maybe the base point is, are we going to trust God's definition of that choice? Or do we just define our own? So now we're at that part with this infamous first choice, and maybe we're going to look at some different ways to view a few things. Some of them possibly uncomfortable. Because as some parts come in, as this question comes up with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, Tov and Ra, and those other entities that are involved in the story. So, you know, one of the interesting parts in any movie is as we watch, I think it's the introduction of the characters. You know, we see them, and then we try to start, and we're trying to figure out the part they play in the story. Are they going to be good? But when you see them for the first time, you don't know if they're good guys or bad guys, right? Are they going to add to the story? Are they going to subtract from the story? You don't know how much impact that character is going to have as the story goes on, because it's the first time you see them. You're seeing them on the screen. You're going, okay, they're going to be good guys or gals or bad guys or gals. And then, sometimes, they'll have an opening scene with people walking by, and then you'll realize they're just bystanders. They're an extra. And they're bringing you or segueing you to the scene. You know, movies, they can tell us a lot in a short span of time. But this story, it's not a movie. We can't even see it. We can only imagine it. And we can only imagine what's already in our minds. So we already have a bias as we come to the story. We are projecting ourselves, our imaginations, onto the story. And believe me, this is probably not the first time that we've done this in Genesis, that whole creation story. That's fraught with imagination and discovery. But also, this is not going to be the last time that we're going to have to deal with this. But now our problem and our challenge is that we already come to the story because somebody else has already told us the story. They've told us how this story plays out. Because we really, honestly, have no way of hearing it unadulterated for the first time. I mean, this story, for the vast majority of us, was told to us before we even read it. You know, it's kind of like getting a spoiler before a movie. And even more, what someone told us, well, that often just becomes the default. I mean, some of those blanks, they're already filled in. We haven't read this story for the first time because that makes it hard. It makes it challenging. It makes it difficult. Because then we tend to have that answer, that story told, and now we just defend the answer that we were given. We defend the story we were told. But it's the nature of what we do. I understand it. But that doesn't mean that maybe it's worthy of a question. It's worth being looked at maybe a little differently. So enters this serpent. We often use the term snake, this creature. And again, it's because we use the word and we grab it, and everything we know now gets projected backwards. Even the folks at the Bible Project do it in the drawings that they produce, yeah? But for me, to add to the messy mix, I have a vision of snakes, yet I have a maritime version of a serpent. They do tend to be a bit larger, at least in the book drawings. But I've never seen anyone depict a garden scene with the serpent and Eve, Chava, and Adam, and the serpent was standing. Yet the curse, and if we tried to read it in the direction of the story, this creature is then cursed to the ground on its belly. But maybe it's just a bit more disturbing to draw in church a creature that we have problems imagining, and then bring that creature down to its belly. I want to add another thought to the mix. I mean, this is a creature, this serpent, that God made. Then we're going to make a quick sideways step. You might want to sit for this. The serpent shows up in chapter 3. Let's drift back a little. I mean, God made every creature. They even all paraded right before Adam so that he could name them, realize what went together. Remember, this was Adam's realm to manage, yeah? So Adam, he already knows the serpent. My mind goes to sideways questions like these, yeah. But right now, we only know that 1, God made every creature, and 2, that this creature is allowed in the garden. Remember, this is sacred space, special space. Remember, this is the center of the land of Eden. Then Tim brings up a pretty interesting point. He said that this serpent, this is obviously in rebellion against God. So this creature is actually, I'd say, the first rebellion. This creature is acting counter to what it's supposed to do. It rebels in its purpose. And then it's asking us to do the same. I mean, the serpent's offer, in a way, he spins the story, right? Is that you won't die and you'll become like God. So is this, right, this offer, is there a modicum of truth? Is there enough truth in it to make one doubt for a bit? The entirety of that discussion is probably for another time, since on the surface, it kind of fell out that way, right? They didn't die as in immediately, and they were taking over for God. God said that. He said, okay, it's your way. You're probably not going to like it. The way Tim puts it, and I like, was that the exchange, it spirals out of control. This one little moment now leads to a chain of events that walks us all the way down this path. To be honest, we actually, in this particular deal, we can actually empathize, we can sympathize, we can actually understand what they're doing. Why? Because we actually live this way. We are living and doing exactly what they did. So probably when given the choice, we'd probably choose the same. So yeah, I did love how Tim and John put this, that the first casualty was the intimacy with humans. The second casualty was the intimacy with God. I really like that. I mean, we're going to see more of this way down the road, right? Because, we're actually covering this in our Sermon on the Mount series. We're going to be going into the human intimacy, the God intimacy. And then with the challenges with that, since God then puts a heavy emphasis on our human intimacy parts, what we're supposed to do with that. Because humanness is the important element in this. And it's the thing that gets broken. And Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, he will address ways for us in our parts to do this part differently. I've mentioned him before, Skip Moen. He has a book. It's called Guardian Angel. I'll put a link to that in the description below. But in that book, Guardian Angel, right, he addresses a particular relationship that gets broken in the garden, and how that Hava, or Eve's response to this whole event, and Adam's response to his part as well, and how they deal with it. And then maybe, as Skip goes, maybe how we might want to think to do it differently. I mean, I think it's worth a read or a listen if you have the audiobook, but I think you'll find it engaging and compelling because the events in the garden, they broke a lot of things. Its spiral went very wide indeed, and nakedness? That's just the beginning. So we're going to get to more of those post-garden activities, that part of the story, next week. We're going to leave more questions for sure, lay them out on the table. So, thank you for with us tonight on another edition of Outside the Class, the TaNaK, the Old Testament, Bereshit, Genesis, chapters 1 through 11, part 2, on the Dusty Feet.